this is, I have to give you a little bit of background here with regard to how we came to this day. Some years ago, I was invited by my congressman to go visit Cuba on an educational mission. It was back in the day when travel to Cuba was, very, very difficult. And I agreed, and I went with my congressman, and my assignment was to go to Cuba, which is the Polytechnic University in Havana. And that's where I first met Jose Martinez. Now, it turns out that Jose is a very prominent figure in that university, indeed in Cuba, and also a member of the Academy of Sciences in Cuba. He invited me to come back and do some lectures at his university, which Kathy and I did a couple of years later. And Kathy and I went to Cuba. We spent a very enjoyable week or so with Jose and his family and his colleagues at the university. Now, you probably also know that it's very difficult for professionals to leave Cuba. It's almost impossible for them to come to the United States. I received an email from Jose's daughter about 4 or 5 months ago, asked me if I was the same professor who had visited with her in Cuba some years ago. I said yes, and this reestablished the link. But it turns out that in the interim, Jose and his whole family have emigrated to Canada and are now in Toronto. Now in January, he received the proper visa clearances to be able to come to the United States. And so it's my pleasure to have him visit with us here and to reciprocate with regard to the professional visit and host him here at SUNY IT. So this is a very wonderful day. Jose has tremendous expertise in the engineering area, especially in the problem-solving area. He has a theory. He's working on a book in that area that's very unique. And I asked him actually not to talk about that because I was hoping to appeal to a little bit broader audience. And so I asked him to focus on higher level, university level education in Cuba. This is something that most of us don't know anything about, I can assure you. I was really impressed with his university in Cuba, in Havana, because they engaged in project-based learning to an extent that exceeded most U.S. universities. There are a few that engage in real-world problem-solving as part of their education, and his is one of them, and some of our universities do the same thing. But I was very impressed with the pedagogy they employed at this university, and so I think we're going to have an interesting talk here today. So, Jose, please.
Thank you, Thomas. Well, I'm most proud to be here in this beautiful campus, and well, let's enter in the matter. I was a full professor of UJAI, the Technical University in Havana, Cuba. I became later the coordinator of the Technical Sciences section of the Academy of Sciences of my country. When I came to Canada and was just a visitor, I became a technical writer, and now I am beginning to try to introduce my computational solving problem into industry and academia. This lecture will comprise 6 points. Cuba in a nutshell, UJAI the flagship, a quick view about Cuba and my university, something about the origin and evolution of our curriculum, about faculty, and some about the outreach of my university, and just a few pinpoints, personal pinpoints. Cuba is a group of islands in the Caribbean facing the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, and you know, Key West is just 90 miles from Cuba. The main island holds 95% of country's land, and also the highest point in the nation, 2,000 feet, 2,005 meters here. These are some socioeconomic indexes of Cuba. They are, in a certain way, they are in contradiction. the population density is about, well, this number is a normalized world rank. Number, if you are in 1, it means you are in the highest level in the world. If you are in the 0, it means you are in the lowest level in all the world, of all the countries. This means that the population density is about the middle, in the 56%. The GDP per capita is about the middle of the countries of the world. The people earn less than Cuba, and the other half earn more. The life expectancy is high, thanks to a general system of health, but the birth rate is very low. Only 10 children are born of every 1,000 inhabitants. This is very low, and since 2006 our population is diminishing. Why? Because young people don't want to have children because they don't earn enough, they are very poor, they don't have a house, and food is very expensive, and that's the explanation of this. But according to the first 3 columns, the United Nations gives a Human Development Index that is about 70% of the countries of the world. So only 30% of the countries of the world live better than Cuba. But maybe if you see this, it's not exactly the same figure that you get from the first 3 columns. Cuba, before the revolution, was a country, a really paradise for the immigrants. Many people from Spain, from Europe, even from countries like Germany, Hungary, Poland, came to Cuba and established it and lived there. After the revolution, the current was reversed, and now we have a lot of immigrants outside. Every 11 of every 121 Cubans live abroad. This guy is very happy because he received his passport. He was asking for it for a long time. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, the economy is in a disaster, it's in a big trouble, and only tourism and professional services to very close allies of the government like Venezuela are giving some money to the economy, but it's not enough. And talking about the history of science and education in Cuba, we see that the Havana University was opened very, very far ago, and also the Academy of Sciences of Cuba. The Academy of Sciences of Cuba was founded before the Academy of Sciences of the United States by President Lincoln, and is still working. So we have a tradition. This is Havana Cathedral. It's close to the place where the first Havana University was opened, and it's also close to the place where the Academy of Sciences was opened. You can visit. Most famous Cuban scientist was Carlos Finlay. He discovered that the yellow fever was carried by a mosquito. It was a revolution in the scientific theories of his time. Only in 1900, the Walter Reed Commission accepted these results and applied in Canada, in Panama, during the construction of the Panama Canal, where about half of the workers died from yellow fever. He not only finds that the mosquito was the carrier, but he developed methods to control the mosquito. And Walter Reed applied this. During this 110 years, Cuban civil engineering and architecture get world renowned because they developed a number of works very important, known today as the 7 marvels of Cuban civil engineering and architecture. One of these 7 marvels is this Foxa building made entirely of concrete, no steel girders inside, and with 39 floors. At that time, it was the theory that too high buildings of concrete were not appropriate. But this work proved that this theory was not certain. So there was a technology in engineering and architecture in Cuba before the revolution. After the revolution, cooperation with France around the early 60s helped the country to train a number of life science scientists, and they were so impressed with the technology of France that we made this big research center in Havana, almost a copy of the National Research Center of France, an architecture though. After it was developed this big genetic engineering and biotechnology center that is now producing a number of vaccines and other special medicines. Now the product of selling these products abroad is about the third source of income of the country. But it's not high, it's a low income at the end, unfortunately. Let's talk something about Cuba. Cuban elementary education covers grades 1 to 6, then the high school is divided in junior high school and then senior high school, similar to Canada and the United States. The degrees change. And education is free and is mandatory till grade 9. Higher education is provided by a number of higher education centers. This is the Latin American School of Medicine, where many persons from Latin America studied, become physicians in studies that are subsidized with the money of the Cuban government. Some Americans are studying medicine there. I knew one of them. He lived at my home. But very few, but some. The top ranked higher education center is Havana University. Well, the oldest one. It has now 286 years with 15 faculties and 16,000 students. It's the biggest center in the country, the most renowned. In the second place is the Jose Antonio Echeverria Higher Polytechnic Institute. We call it CUJAI for a number of historic reasons. He was founded in 1964, and then he was, for a number of years, the Faculty of Technology of Havana University. Then it became an independent university. I was graduated from this Technology Faculty of Havana University, so in fact I had 2 alma maters. This as a Technology Faculty of Havana University, and then my doctoral degree, my Ph.D. degree from the CUJAI as an independent university. Now, in its 50th anniversary, the CUJAI comprises 7 faculty, 8,100 students, and is the undisputed flagship of the engineering and architecture education in Cuba. Havana University doesn't have careers of engineering and architecture. Here we see another photo of the place, the area of the campus. about 40 buildings and other facilities. Professor Durgi visited this area, you remember?
I remember it well.
Until 2011, Cuba graduated more than 50,000 engineers and architects, and people from 68 nations have also studied there. I had students from Madagascar, from Mexico, from different countries of Latin America and Africa especially. Very few people from Europe and North America, of course. Let's talk something about the curricula. During the first 12 years, instruction at Cuba was very dynamic, many changes at the same time. A higher education ministry doesn't exist, only a small department inside the big education ministry that covers all kinds of education at that time. So we have a certain degree of university autonomy at that time. And at that time, we developed our own curricula, which we ourselves choose which textbooks we are going to use. We had a certain degree of independence. And most of the professionals that founded Cuba studied in Havana University and in some American universities. I had a professor who studied mechanical engineering in Yale, Professor Portuondo. Other professor was a mechanical engineer from the Louisiana University and so forth. So at that time, the Soviet Union was known. Yes, they sent rockets to the moon, but nobody had visited a Soviet university then, in the very, very beginning of the revolution. And so, when the first curricula were developed, these professionals looked at the American universities for curricula. Some of the curricula were inspired in the MIT curricula at that time, of the end of the 50s. This is not well known to many people. This is the original structure of Cuba, 6 schools, and the majors, they graduate. Later, the mines engineering was transferred to another province, because in Havana there are no mines, really. But this was the original setup of Cuba. And usually, in the last year, because we have 5 years of instruction for university, for engineers, in the last year, students may receive 1 or 2 subject matters that differentiate one group from the other, but it's not a specialization. It's just a mild specialization, let's say. For example, in my class, we had 2 groups, the design group and the agricultural machinery group. These were the 2 groups in my age. For example, Professor Nodar founded the School of Mechanical Engineering in Havana. It was founded in another university on the other end of the country, and he initially was the instructor of most courses. He was at the beginning the only professor in the School of Mechanical Engineering. Regrettably, many documents from that time were lost. The style of our government is not to store many papers, and recently I was trying to get a copy of my plan of studies to become a professional engineer here in Canada, and I called the Havana University. Oh, I would like the program of philosophy of the course 1970 to the head of department. I don't have anything from that time. Maybe I wasn't asking for a document of the 15th century. A curious thing is that although a number of Soviet textbooks in Spanish were available, most students prefer American texts. For example, in engineering physics in second year, students received the Russian Frisch Timoreva textbook in Spanish, but they prefer C.R. Szymanski. Curious. C.R. Szymanski, although the number of copies of C.R. Szymanski was very small, students make a kind of a competition to see who gets from the library first. Later in the last years, some good Soviet textbooks were used. For example, I remember on steam turbines, a very good book from a designer of turbines who worked in Kharkov, in Kiev, in Ukraine. Now there are problems in Kharkov, in the same city, because they like to be Russians again. And what happened? This autonomy of that time in the textbooks matter was a waste of resources. I remember in my own department, textbooks of engineering mechanics, in 10 years we used 5 different textbooks till we found Beer and Johnston. After Beer and Johnston, everything here is. After Beer and Johnston, the flow stopped. But before, and since the Ministry of Higher Education was founded in this year, well, the first job was to unify the curriculum. But you know, hell is full of good intentions. And the first result was a disaster. They made the first generation of unified curricula, the so-called A plans, were applied from academic year 77-78 on. But these A plans defined a total of 250 majors. It's incredible. Many in engineering, because that was the idea of the government, that the development of the country was just a task for technology. Human subject matters were not important. The enrollment of humanities was cut and substituted for engineering, all engineers. It was the belief at the time. And this crazy number of options offered by A plans was not an idea of the university. What was the source of this? All the ministries of the government came to the university, to Kuhai. Kuhai, I am the Ministry of Transport. I want an engineer for loading and unloading of ships. Just for that. And I want an engineer for the wheel of the truck. Every ministry wanted its own engineers, tailored to their current needs and plans. Plans 20 years from there. And most of these majors were studied in the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was at that time the second superpower and a big economy. You cannot compare the Soviet Union with the Cuban economy. It was crazy. Curiously enough, the Soviet Union at that time was trying to reduce the number of majors. At the same time we were trying to introduce the system, they were trying to dismount the system. It was a time of crazy. Of course, these A plans were only partially realized. It was impossible. There were no teachers to teach so many different courses. And the second generation B plans in 1982, 1983 on, they defined a smaller system, only containing the majors that were being taught at the university at that time, not the 250 crazy number. And afterwards, it became clear for the higher education and the world government that Cuba needed not a big number of small specializations, but wide-profile engineers that can work here or there. So I was graduated from mechanical engineering in design, and I was sent to an agricultural machine station. And the people who were graduated as mechanical engineers in agricultural machinery were sent to design centers. Because, you know, real life is different from any theory, and it changes frequently. You cannot prepare such a narrow profile person. It's very inflexible. In line with these ideas, the third generation of unified curricula, the C plans, were replaced from 1991 on, the number of majors to 94 from 250. And we receive a certain degree of autonomy because before I received the curricula in detail, what I must teach in mechanisms in every class. Now, in the C plans, I receive a curriculum, a program or mechanism that tell me the titles of the main things to be developed. And I have the freedom to make a rational disposition according to my experience and make some innovation too. And now, recently, a number of studies about the graduates of the C plans pointed to the lack of a general culture in the students, especially in the so-called local universities. This was one of the last genial ideas of the head of the government. Universities in every county, let's say, using the terminology of North America. And of course, these county universities cannot develop the proper educational process. And a group of graduates, of the first graduates of these county universities, wrote a letter to a ministry full of grammar errors, barbaric grammar errors, and it was a scandal. Now these county universities are disappearing. This was a movement similar to what Mao Zedong made in China at the beginning of the 60s with the Red Guards and taking big industries and big universities and send them to the fields in small towns to divide the people, because these big groups of people thinking in a big enterprise or in a big university were a danger for Mao Zedong when he was becoming to feel old. And the head of Cuban government at that time made the same decision. He founded an organization of young people that only directly commanded by him, like Mao with the Red Guards. It's incredible how story sometimes repeats itself. It's incredible. With the same developments, it's incredible. And so now the new D plans under development will be aimed to reinforce the humanistic contents who was quoted in 1959. Now people recognize that engineers need to study more humanistic subjects, like my Professor Portuondo studied in jail. In jail, my Professor Portuondo of Mechanical Engineering Faculty studied, I remember, Don Quixote in English. In 1959, it was not understandable by the government why Portuondo studied Don Quixote in his mechanical engineering career in Yale. But well, people know why Yale is Yale. That's all. And this is the current structure of the faculties and the associated majors at CUJAE. Architecture, continuous architecture. Civil engineer now contains also hydraulic engineering, very good. They have one of the best laboratories in all Latin America, the best hydraulic laboratories. Electrical engineering, of course, includes automation, telecommunication and electronics, and very recently, biomedical engineering. You understand. Mechanical engineering contains, beyond the general profile, the metallurgical profile. Why? Because in Havana there is an important, for Cuba, steel making factory. Chemical engineering, the industrial engineering, and the new computer sciences engineering, according to the times we are living. Of all these 12 majors, 11 are accredited. We are following the American experience in the ABET plans, are studied now by our professors, how the Americans make the accreditation of the university, and we are trying to copy or make our own version of this kind of accreditation, the importance of accreditation. And today, CUJAE is not only an undergraduate higher education center, but also it's a graduate study center with authority to deliver master and PhD degrees. I myself received my PhD from CUJAE, and is also a research technical university. Let's talk a little about pedagogy. When I was a student, there was a very professional shortage in Cuba. Many professionals emigrated to other countries, looking at the craziness of the government, and most of the teachers at CUJAE were non-graduated instructors, simply students from the next year of the study or 2 years after. These students should obtain excellent results in their studies, but at the same time they should attend their classes. If there is a coincidence, they should attend their students, not their own classes. It was a very nice movement. I was part of this movement. I was a non-graduated instructor all my career. It was an honor at that time to be a non-graduated instructor, and CUJAE was reasoned by this way. Many different learning organization systems were tested in this turbulent time. We divided the year in 3 periods instead of 2, teaching and evaluating a single subject at a matter. Let's say now thermal plants all days, all the time, morning and and morning and afternoon only thermal plants. We finish thermal plants in 2 or 3 weeks, and we make the final examination. And then we continue with another subject matter, one at a time. A big disaster. This was called the system of blocks. Students called the dead block system. It was a real disaster. Apparently, the human brain cannot receive so much information of one kind. We need to give several subject matters in parallel. Although when you take the number of hours, the load time, it is the same, but it's not the same for here. And it was a big disaster, for example. Some professors used overhead projectors but with rolls of film, and they turned the lever continuously, slowly but continuously, so the text was non-stop. It's incredible. Like small kids. We were like small kids at that time. And final exams lasted up to 12 hours. But you know, students can go to the cafeteria with nothing, no control over them. They can go to a cafeteria, they can talk and return to the exam. It's a curiosity. Some basic departments were famous for the difficult exams, especially physics and mathematics. I don't need to tell you. And after days of discussions with the Student Federation, some of these exams were declared invalid and repeated the days after. At the end, life imposed classical pedagogical traditions, detailed lectures, practical classes, study based on class notes, since there were not enough books, 4 hours, final exams, and academic year divided in 2 semesters. A positive experience in mechanical engineering was the introduction of the so-called course projects for subject matters like mechanisms, machine design, and so forth. And these projects involved a lot of hard work for students. They need to write a report and make a number of medium-sized drawing sheets. Sometimes in the same subject, 3, let me think in American terms, 3 some 3D size drawing sheets in a single subject matter, and then go to a tribunal of 2 professors and discuss the project. It was a lot of work for the students, but the students learned doing what it was explained in class. And you know, there's a big difference to attend a lecture and accept what the teacher is presenting to you. And another thing is to take paper and pencil and apply all this to a concrete example. I myself remember that we don't put an emphasis on the final result, if the final result was correct or not. Maybe the final result is not correct, but the student tried and made a search in this direction and a search in the other direction, and at the end they learn. The final result is important, but it was not the center of the attention during the evaluation of these course projects. And most alumni are very enthusiastic that this method continues applying even today. This is a table of the number of teachers and researchers nowadays at Cuba, and how many of them are women. The careers with more women are, of course, architecture and chemical engineering. These researchers are, they don't lecture, only make research work. Yes,
I don't
Professor.
want to interrupt you, but I'm interested about the column titles. Are those men professors, women professors?
No, no.
Researchers?
Total of teachers.
Okay.
And how many?
What does the women column mean?
No. This is the total number of teachers and the total number of researchers. And
Okay.
how many of them are women?
Fraction of women.
How many of them?
Okay.
Yes, you're right, Professor. The table is not clear on that. Years
Not a
ago,
fraction, it's the number of women. Of the 145, there are 31 women who are.
yes.
In ME.
Years ago, between the fall of the Soviet Union, when Cuba received at that time $8 billions of dollars of help every year, Cuba reached 12,000 students and about 1,000 professors. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, when we needed to begin to live with our own resources, the enrollment was reduced drastically, and also the number of professors. Not so drastically, but was reduced as a need. And at that time, when Cuba began, the research began for students like me, for example, who worked as professor in one department and then wanted to make research in another department. This is the way the research began. And we received a support of a special fund of the United Nations, about $2 million. It was a lot of money in the 60s, a lot of money. And using this fund, Cuba laboratories received quality equipment. For example, Brilliant Care was one of the best in the world, vibration measurement instruments, and many new books and journals, including a lot of journals of American engineering societies, as the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, of Civil Engineers, of Electrical Engineers. Of course, after 1965, where the big science in Cuba was organized around the life sciences, money was available to those faculties who aligned with the life sciences. For example, mechanical engineering usually doesn't receive much money. Contradictory at the same time, there were a lot of some investments in Santa Clara, in Holguín, and more with Soviet money, very heavy plants, and even in Havana, the steel plant I was telling you. But most of these big plants, industrial plants, heavy machinery, steel, mining were never finished. Only the mining of nickel, which in fact there were two American plants made before the revolution. One during the Second World War and the other at the end of the 50s, due to the importance of nickel for special steels. All the other were never finished. And special research centers of the big ministries didn't receive money either, were contracting, all of disappeared. Despite these limitations, applied research at Cuba became more organized along the years, I'm telling about 10 years ago, it become more organized, and some ministries don't have any money for research and came to Cuba to solve the most pressing problems, and we helped it. And I think the last 10 years are the best in research for many faculties of Cuba, for example, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. The last 10 years have been the best ones, incredibly, because we are very poor, very poor, but the science developed better than decades ago when we have plenty of money. And Cuba has received a number of national awards, many professors there, including the annual award of the Academy of Sciences. These are the research and study centers of Cuba nowadays. A research center has a higher category in the scientific system of the country, and a center of study is more modest, with much less resources, much less personnel working there. I think the most important are the Hydraulic Research Center, as I told you, one of the biggest in all Latin America. This is probably the most important, because I think one of the columns that support a real research center are laboratories. The laboratories are very poor. More than half of the equipment doesn't work. You can tell you are a real research center. Computers are abundant, since personal computers are so cheap. They are cheaper than TV sets. We have, I think, enough computers. Not too much, but enough computers. Of course, PC, simple PCs. No workstations, no mainframes. But nowadays you can do a lot of things with a good PC. You can do a lot of things nowadays. Outreach. Cuba is closely linked to all ministries, because there are many professors who are members of the boards of important ministries. For example, Professor Peter Borrelli, he's the main authority in the country. He published a book that it has been published even in China. His book is published in China, in Chinese. So he's a real expert. He's also a member of the Academy of Sciences. So we are very well linked to the Ministry of Construction. And the same thing with the late Professor Diosdado Perez Franco, my friend, a brilliant professional who was during many years one of the 2 vice presidents of the Cuban Academy of Sciences. And many graduate courses, many graduate, many graduate courses are developed within industrial facilities, sometimes in Cuba, sometimes abroad. This includes distant places like the plant in Santa Clara and the mines of Moa, located very far from our campus. And beyond Cuba's borders, Cuba has established links of cooperation with universities in Europe, Canada, and Latin America in this order. When the first non-graduate instructors received their titles around 1965, most were sent to Soviet University to undergo training, short courses of 1 or 2 years of training, and some were sent to the United Kingdom and France. For example, my friend Fausto went to the United Kingdom to study metrology, remember. And some advisors from these countries came to Cuba. Almost in parallel, wide relationship was established with several Canadian universities, especially the Waterloo University in Ontario. Two graduated Cuba instructors were sent there in 1968 to develop their master thesis in mechanical engineering. Both ended their missions brilliantly in just 2 years. One of them, during the rest of his life, was the chief of the Applied Mechanics Department, and the other is currently Cuba's Minister of Higher Education, a master of Waterloo University, not from a Soviet university. It's very interesting. But let me tell you, is a Minister of Education today. 10 years ago, he was only the Vice Ministry. He was never appointed to a ministry because it was a highly political post. Now is the ministry because the country wanted to be in contact again with North America. But you know, what the law is not interested now. We lose a lot. And the cooperation with Canadian universities continued for a few years, and some people studied there in Waterloo and also in Saskatchewan and completed their thesis in Havana, and a similar cooperation with the Katowice University in Poland. At that time, a discussion was promoted by the ministry about which way should be followed in graduate education and research. The Soviet way, let's say the socialist way, or the Canadian way, let's say the North American way. I was present in the main discussion. And of course, the answer was known from before the meeting began. It was taken the Soviet way. A big mistake. Years after, the National Commission of Scientific Degrees established the master as a scientific degree, and the Soviet candidate system was replaced by the Ph.D. I first received my degree of candidate of science, and then years after, I received another certificate telling that this is equivalent to a Ph.D. because the Ph.D. is now a scientific degree in Cuba. It's very interesting to see how there are processes that you try to change, but like the gravity is always waiting for you. When you when you leave free the object, it falls to the ground. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, cooperation with the universities of Russia and East Europe was interrupted, so new links were sought with Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil, our neighbors. Incredible, yes? After the fall of the Soviet Union, and for example, a lot of cooperation was done with this university in Venezuela. In less than 2 years, we were developing projects there in the big enterprises in this city of Venezuela, a big industrial city, but very well known. How many of you have heard about Guyana City or Puerto Ordaz City? But they have a hydropower station of 10 million of kilowatts installed. They have a big steel plant who makes 6 million of tons of iron every year, and so forth. Big industry of aluminium, using the electricity of the hydroelectric electricity. And we developed a number of courses at that time. In Brazil, a number of professors developed their master and PhD degrees because we have cooperation with the Polytechnic School of the Sao Paulo University, one of the best universities in all Latin America. They developed their studies in the problems of deep water drilling and extraction of oil from the deep sea. And this cooperation arrived to an end when a number of Cuban professors decided to settle in Brazil because they found that living there was easier than in Cuba. The Cuban government decided to interrupt the cooperation with the universities who had accepted Cuban professors working. You cannot block a neighborhood because your wife marries one man of this neighborhood. You cannot block the whole neighborhood. This is your personal problem. It's incredible. I told sometimes, but nobody wanted to hear. In just a few days ago, a cooperation agreement was reached within the Ministry of Higher Education and the main university in Mexico, UNAM, Universidad Nacional de Mexico. A lot of professors, Cuban professors, will go there to make master and Ph.D. thesis, will stay there, and the Cuban government will again break relationships with UNAM. This is going to be 5 years from now. And the process repeats sometimes. There's no real movement. You are moving up and down, moving up and down, but you don't move forward. This is a problem of our country. Well, let me say that a sincere friend suggested me to conclude this presentation with some words about myself. And, well, I would like to pay attention to his suggestion. Of course, many points in the core of this lecture mirror my own career. I wrote this presentation from my memories of that time. I live out many of these processes I am telling you. I don't read from books. I live myself. And, well, I was around Cuba for 40 years, beginning as a student and ending as a full professor. And, well, I define myself as a multidisciplinary professional engineer. I like to be in a classroom, in a lab, working with a computer, or in an industrial workshop. I feel okay. I worked in the applied mechanics department, beginning as an undergraduate instructor in 1969. I became a full professor in 1985. And my teaching spectrum covers 8 undergraduate and 8 graduate subject matters. All of them enjoyed full attendance, even when even in non-mandatory cases. I was never a member of the people who decided which subject matters are going to be mandatory, for example, in a master degree, in a master program, because all the members of the committee, their subject matters were always mandatory. I don't want this problem, but the students always came to my courses. Besides lectures and seminars, I tutored capstone projects, 48 at the baccalaureate level, 19 at the master, and 7 were my PhDs. The last one, just after coming to Canada, he defended his thesis while I was in Canada already, and I sent my opinion as a member of the Academy of Sciences, because I was a member of the Academy of Sciences till 2011, when new elections were developed. They respected my membership to the Academy of Sciences for 3 years. I don't know why, but they did it, and I appreciate it. In Cuba and other countries, I developed a total of 17 engineering projects that they solved a number of complex practical problems, some of them for the first time. For example, the first time in the world when Brown Boveri, ABB gave the plant a very special price because it was the first installation in the world. I told them, you are making an experiment in here, in this plant. So you have to give the plant a very special price, and they give the plant a very special price. The management of the plant didn't understand that, and they decided not to buy the nether this year, but next year. Next year, the price was most elevated because during this year he installed another drive in Norway. And you know, when the people of the plant told ABB, oh, but the increase in the price is not is much more than the depreciation of the dollar. How do you justify this? You know what was the answer of ABB? We never gave this price. Do you think that an equipment valued in $250,000 can be given by a minor employee? Well, the answer was, we never gave such a price. It was 18 months ago. It's an interesting experience, but what a big transnational enterprise can give you as an answer to a question of why the price has risen. But I know the rise. I know the reason of the price difference. And working on behalf of CUHAI and the Cuban Academy of Sciences, I also developed some engineering work in Russia, in Germany, in Mexico, in Brazil. For example, in Russia was my first travel abroad in 1982. There was a big program of the Soviet Union to develop very fast the science and technology in Cuba, 1982. And all the ministries sent specialists, engineers, to a big delegation who was in Moscow about 3 months, living in a big Moscow hotel. A lot of money. It was crazy. It's impossible to talk what happened during these 3 months. I'm just going to tell you something. At the end, people of the mission, of the Cuban mission, had promised that the big list of equipment to be received by Cuba was going to be presented to the Soviet officer on certain day, and that the president of the Academy of Science is going to sign this. According to this, the Soviets sent the president of the other counterpart. I was sent to the lobby of the hotel, to talk with them in Russian for a while, so to get time to finish. It was impossible. There are a heap of paper of this size, handwritten. At the end, the president, the Soviet counterpart president, received the news that the president of the Cuban Academy of Sciences was not there to sign anything. So he went to go and left his vice president. We go up to the 17th floor. This hotel has in every corner a big saloon. The vice president was from Armenia. The Cuban manager told him, we are going to finish this in 3 or 4 days. And the Soviet counterpart answered, look, nobody can sign this. but I am going to sign. Nobody, this is not in a state to be signed for nobody, but I will sign. But I want a copy, a typewriter copy, in my desk in a month. No, we are going to give you in 3 days. No. Please, in a month. At the other day, we continued to Germany to continue the work in Germany. After 2 months, it wasn't still delivered. It was delivered at the end. Long stories about that. But it's part of my story. I helped, I think, my university with the project learning, and since I didn't have computing in my engineering studies, I need to taught myself computing, and nowadays I'm a good, let's say, a good amateur. In recognition of my research work, I was elected member of the higher Scientific Council of the Cuban Academy of Sciences, and then provisional member, full member, and finally coordinator of the Technical Sciences section. A good, very good group of engineers, civil, mechanical, chemical, computing engineers. That was the core of the Technical Sciences section of the Academy of Sciences since 2003 till 2008 when I left the country. I was, on behalf of CUHAI, an academic member of the American Gear Manufacturers Association, which is an organization of enterprises, but some professors of universities that teach gears can be academic members for a very small fee. And a paper based on one of my projects was accepted and presented at the AUMA Fall Technical Meeting, the most exclusive gear event in the world, in its edition of 1999. I was a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Due to budget problems, I am not renewing this. I hope in the next future I can renew. But I am now a member of the EAAA and also of the Computer Society of the AAA, like a good amateur of computing. I was inspired to study mechanical engineering when I knew that real astronautics need the work of many mechanical engineers. Von Braun was a mechanical engineer, the Soviet specialist, and Sergei Korolev was also a mechanical engineer, and Qian Huisen, the Chinese, who studied here in the United States, in the MIT and the Caltech, and founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory jointly with von Karman, and then returned to China and developed the rocketry of China. He is also a mechanical engineer. So I became a mechanical engineer inspired in these facts. But my main reference has been always the American space program due to its openness, contrasting to the secrecy of everything in the Soviet Union. I wrote in a popular science journal of my country many articles on astronautics. The most important was published in 1970 about the Apollo program. Professor Durgi has a copy. Maybe you still have this copy. The name of the paper was Apollo, an overview of its technology. I wrote when I was in my sophomore year, pressed by the exams. I wrote this article, and I talked with the director of the journal. I told him, look, the Americans are going to get to the moon in 6 months. People are talking in the streets, not knowing how the Americans, from being late, now are in the front. Let's explain them, because people were talking that the Americans were using some secret fuels and some secret things that nobody can understand. And I wanted to demystify and explain to people how the Saturn V rocket, what's the structure, how many engines that is used kerosene as fuel, and so forth. I developed a very interesting article since it was the 10th anniversary of the journal. They gave me a number of pages, never before or after. I have this number of pages to do that, and I was in jail for making American propaganda because it was authorized by the director of the journal, who was a member of the youth organization of the party at the same time. So, well, I am satisfied of having worked always without violating any technical or ethical principle. That's why I am now trying to become a professional engineer in Ontario, to develop my profession within the law. And to conclude, I have had the privilege of watching my daughter and my son studying at Cuba and becoming afterwards excellent professionals, both in Cuba and now in Canada. My son is working in a big engineering enterprise. He's a project leader of piping in Hatch, developing projects of billions of dollars. Now he's working on these days on behalf of Hatch in South Africa. He worked some years ago also in Australia, because this is a transnational enterprise. So I'm happy. I cannot feel bad, really, but I want to continue in the fight. That's why I am visiting you to talk about some of my current projects and to see if we can find space for a kind of cooperation. And I want to say thank you to the SUNY IT, and especially to Professor Dugin for his very nice invitation today, and of course your attention is very much appreciated. That's all.
Thank you very much. Any quick questions? Albert?
Just curiosity, Cuba today, what's the state of entrepreneurship in Cuba from your perspective?
One of the things, the most terrible things, is when a country loses a lot of these entrepreneurship people. My wife heard the following story when my daughter was in Belgium. About 2 centuries ago, there was a kind of a revolution in Belgium. And usually revolutions don't like people who are rich or who have some special intelligence. So entrepreneurships were present a lot, like in Cuba, and most of them moved to Netherlands. Still today, the development of the economy of Belgium is below. It's high, but it's still below the level of development of Netherlands. I'm telling you that because the consequences are far-reaching. If the States, for example, loses a lot of personnel, let's say to China, many engineers now move to China to work there. The United States may lose precious, because you can have the country destroyed. For example, Germany after the war, after the Second World War. See this ruble, but they rebuild everything. London. So that's why I'm here with 65 years, and I should be in my country, being a professor in special status. After the age of retirement, you get a special status. You don't need to give so many classes to the students. But I decided to came to Canada with my wife and of course to live with my son, with my daughter, and our 3 grandkids. And that's why I'm here and not in my country.
Fascinating. First, thanks very much. I appreciate so much
Thank you, President.
the time and effort. It was a wonderful presentation. And I look forward to one day where we can have much easier exchange of students and people and faculty with Cuba. It's got such a rich history. And having worked with so many Cuban Americans, especially that had come to the U.S. After the revolution, and are scattered throughout the government labs and so forth. It's a precious resource, so hopefully we're very close to that happening. But on behalf of SUNY IT, it's my pleasure to offer you this medallion. It's a seal of SUNY IT, and just so you don't lose it, there is an inscription on the back with your name on it.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
Wonderful.
So just a very small token. I'm thrilled we could host you here. So, I'm very happy you were able to take the time. So thank you very much.